B. Collins, news and comment. It's Friday, April 24th, 2020. I'm still buzzing from an hour-long interview I conducted earlier today with the amazing Pepe Escobar. Boy, has he got things to say, and you've got to hear them. We'll give you more details a little bit later in this podcast. Now, the big buzz today is about Donald Trump's bizarre musings at his overly long so-called press briefing, where he postures, panders, attacks, bullies, and offers snake oil miracle cures for the coronavirus. And we'll get to those details here very shortly. But I want to kind of present some context about what's going on with Trump. And I, unlike Dr. Justin Frank, I hope you've heard that interview by now, I don't have the psychoanalytic skills to bring to a deep analysis. But on the front page of today's New York Times, there's another one of these White House whispers kind of reports. And, of course, it's all based on anonymous sources. I don't see a single individual here who is directly – oh, no, there's one direct quote from somebody who we were slamming yesterday. But the tone of this is that on almost a daily basis, the executive time that is listed on his schedule, which means he's watching television in the executive suite upstairs at the White House, has now extended from as early as 5 a.m., he doesn't sleep a lot, until noon. And somewhere in there, he gets his hair all glued up and the orange spray applied and puts on a suit and tie, with the tie, of course, that extends below his balls, and he saunters in to the Oval Office. And these insiders whisper the president sees few allies, no matter which channel he clicks. He is angry, even when Fox, an old security blanket, with them, for not portraying him as he would like to be seen. He makes time to watch Governor Cuomo's briefings from New York, closely monitoring for a sporadic compliment or snipe. Confined to the White House, the president is isolated from supporters, visitors, travel, and golf. And I'll add to their lineup here that Mar-a-Lago is closed until further notice, and so are most of his golf clubs. I'm not talking about the sticks. I'm talking about the clubs where they play golf. The article continues, his own internal polling shows him sliding in some swing states, a major reason he declared a temporary halt to the issuance of green cards. And that, of course, is just an old reflex. And here comes the quote. It's from Stephen Moore. And Stephen Moore we cited as one of the people who is orchestrating these mini-mob rallies that get blown up and exaggerated on all the television that Trump watches. And Stephen Moore says he's frustrated. It's like being hit with a meteor. So the article continues. Oh, and here's another actual direct quote. The MyPillow guy, Mike Lindell, a Trump donor, campaign surrogate, visited the White House in late March, and he said the president seemed so glum that Lindell pulled out his phone to show him a text message from a Democratic voting friend of his who thought Trump was doing a good job. Lindell said Trump perked up with the praise. I just wanted to give him a little confidence, the pillow guy said. So this is a deeply desperate, insecure man who needs those mobs to respond to his pandering commentary. And he has replaced it somewhat with these lengthy daily briefings. But the report here is that he doesn't even attend the task force meetings that precede the briefings. He doesn't prepare before he steps in front of the cameras. He's often seeing the talking points that aides have prepared for him for the first time as he stumbles through them. The article says he hastily plows through them, usually in a monotone in order to get to the question and answer bullying session with reporters that he relishes, the mud wrestling part of the daily ritual. And they cite unnamed sources who tell us that Dr. Anthony Fauci has complained to them that the amount of time he must spend on the briefings on stage with Trump each day has a draining effect on him. And by now you've probably seen the video footage of Dr. Deborah Birx trying to maintain a stone face when Trump offered his comments yesterday about the miracle cure of bleach, perhaps being injected. And that's what made her adopt a kind of wax museum composure. And so they describe him as increasingly isolated. Hope Hicks maintains his daily schedule. She left for a while and came back. And Mark Meadows, the new chief of staff in the White House, is still fumbling his way around. They call it finding his footing and adjusting to Trump's nocturnal habits, because Trump recently called him at 3:19 a.m. Remember the Hillary campaign ad in 2008 where they were trying to present her vast experience over the neophyte Barack Obama? And she said, who's going to take that phone call at 3 a.m.? Well, it's Mark Meadows today. So you get the idea that he feels isolated. Hey, join the club. A lot of Americans feel very isolated these days. And he keeps trying to pull a rabbit out of a hat to make the pandemic go away. And yesterday we covered how he's trying to wish it away, saying it's not going to come back in the fall, that it's just going to vanish, leaving once again the experts to cringe. And here is something that is remarkable, and I want to thank Merle Kyle. He is a longtime listener. He's based in the Detroit suburb of Royal Oak, and he scours the media day and night and sends me links to articles, many of which are very helpful. And this one is still a big story as I speak to you at 3 in the afternoon, California time today, on the homepage of The Guardian, based in Britain. And they are revealing that earlier this week, the leader of a prominent group peddling potential lethal industrial bleach as a miracle cure for coronavirus wrote to Trump at the White House. And apparently they got this because Mark Grennan, who's the guy who wrote the letter, told Trump, well, he released the letter, posted it on Facebook, told Trump that chlorine dioxide, a powerful bleach used in industrial processes like textile manufacturing that can have fatal side effects when you drink it, is, quote, a wonderful detox that can kill 99%, yes, of the pathogens in the body. He added that it can rid the body of COVID-19. So this is where Trump gets these wacky ideas. And it gets even wackier. This guy, Grennan, styles himself as the Archbishop of Genesis 2, that's the Roman numeral 2, a Florida-based outfit that claims to be a church, but which is in fact the largest producer and distributor of chlorine dioxide bleach as a miracle cure in the United States. He brands the chemical as MMS, Miracle Mineral Solution, and claims that it can cure 99% of all illnesses, including cancer, malaria, HIV, AIDS, as well as autism. Since the start of the pandemic, Genesis 2 has been marketing MMS as a cure to coronavirus. It advises users, including children, to mix 3 to 6 drops of bleach in water and drink it. And he shared his letter in a weekly radio show that's also televised. He said it began, Dear Mr. President, I am praying you read this letter and intervene. Then he got 30 supporters to write to Trump. And I guess at the White House, they just pass all this stuff right through to Trump without filtering it or having somebody, file it away and say, I don't think he really needs to see this. So after Trump gave his performance yesterday, Grennan went further. On his Facebook page, Trump has got the MMS and all the info. Things are happening, folks. Lord, help others see the truth. Well, this same miracle man received a letter, a federal court order last week from the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, barring Genesis 2 from selling what was described as an unproven and potentially harmful treatment for COVID-19. The FDA also ordered a disciple of Genesis 2, Carrie Rivera, to remove claims from her website that MMS cures coronavirus. And this is not all. No, it's not all. Do you remember Alan Keyes? He was an early token host on MSNBC. That was before they went to, what they consider themselves to be all Democratic all the time today. And in the early days, this would have been around the turn of the century. Alan Keyes was on MSNBC, and when they bounced him, he ran for president 3 times. He's also run for the Senate, and he has revealed himself to be quite a crackpot. Alan Keyes has featured Genesis 2 bleach products as a miracle cure on his online conservative TV show called Let's Talk America. So now we go to our daily COVID-19 update, edited by Linda Lewis, and she does great coverage, including verbatim quotes from Trump's remarks yesterday. And before we get to that, just the overview for the day. The worldwide fatality count is now edging up to 200,000. We're at 194,000 as of today. The U.S. Confirmed fatalities at 50,373. And in New York City, the trend continues downward. The fatality rate, or the death count for yesterday, was 422. Now, that's still a lot, but it's the lowest one-day figure since April 1st. And statewide, New York now counts 16,162 departed souls. And again, these figures are wobbly, and the definition of what is a COVID death and what isn't can be argued. But this is the data that we have, and that's why we bring it to you. So Linda reports that the coronavirus has been studied by scientists and has been detected on particles of air pollution. The work is preliminary, like much of this, not yet known if the virus remains viable on pollution particles. And one of the side benefits of the shutdown is that air quality has improved worldwide, and some of the smoggiest, most polluted cities in the world now have generally clear skies. It is remarkable. The Italian scientists use standard techniques to collect outdoor air pollution samples at one urban and one industrial site in Bergamo province, that's in the north where that has been hardest hit, and identified a gene highly specific to COVID-19 in multiple samples. The detection was confirmed by blind testing at an independent laboratory. Then we learned from the Independent in the UK that published some new findings published in the Annals of Internal Medicine indicate that eye fluids from coronavirus patients may be a potential source of infection. Well, next Trump will tell you to use chlorine eye drops, I guess. Anyway, it's rarely reported in confirmed COVID-19 cases. Doctors have reported some patients hospitalized with the virus suffered from conjunctivitis, among their other symptoms. So China said that it is going to donate another $30 million to the World Health Organization, a poke in the eye to the Trump administration, as Trump has cut off about $400 million from the WHO. And as I've said, it's not a perfect organization. Its leader is sketchy. But this is a cruel move at a crisis moment. And the Trump administration refused to participate in a recent conference call with WHO leaders. So now we get to Linda's detailed summary of what happened at yesterday's White House briefing. Bill Bryan, the head of science and technology at the Department of Homeland Security, presented findings of the federal government study on sunlight, humidity, and temperature's effect on the coronavirus, as well as various disinfectants, when it is sprayed on surfaces. So then Trump reacted. Question that probably some of you are thinking of if you're totally into that world, which I find to be very interesting. I'm quoting verbatim here. Sorry that it's not a complete sentence. So supposing we hit the body with a tremendous, whether it's ultraviolet or just very powerful light. And I think you said that it hasn't been checked out, but you're going to test it, Trump said, looking over to Brian. And then I said, supposing you brought the light inside the body, which you can do either through the skin or in some other way, and I think you said you're going to test that too. Sounds interesting, right? Then he went on, and this is the power quote. And then I see the disinfectant where it knocks it out in a minute, 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that by injection inside or almost a cleaning? Because you see, it gets on the lungs and it does a tremendous number. So it'll be interesting to check that. So that you're going to have to use medical doctors. But it sounds interesting to me. So we'll see. But the whole concept of the light, the way it kills it in 1 minute, that's pretty powerful. So let's be clear. Trump did not directly say that he was advocating that we inject chlorine. He thought it was an interesting theory. But again, if you saw the video shoots or footage of Dr. Birx trying to maintain her composure as he rambled on about this, and just the idea is such, anti-science crackpotism, I'm not even sure that's a word, that it really sets a new low for Trump's antics. So he's been hammered on social media. Washington Post headline, Trump asked if disinfectants could be injected to kill coronavirus inside the body. Doctors answered, people will die. The comments even prompted a statement from Reckitt Benckiser Group, the makers of Lysol, warning against improper use of disinfectant products. And they were joined by Clorox and the makers of Tide Balls or Tide Pods, saying, don't ingest this stuff in any way, shape, or form. So then Trump turned around and said he was being sarcastic, that he was baiting reporters. And I listened to the video. I've read the verbatim transcript. There is no indication of sarcasm whatsoever, and I think I have a pretty good sarcasm detector. So we see the White House and ally Rush Limbaugh trying to spin this up. And I only listened to Limbaugh for 5 or 7 minutes this morning, but he played a clip from Nancy Pelosi. And the way she used it, she paraphrased Trump, saying that, he was suggesting that you inject it into the lungs. And given the lack of syntax and basic grammar that Trump speaks with, it was a fair interpretation of what his comment reflected. The White House says it's been taken out of context. They blame the media, fake news, all the usual dodges. So this, I think, will stay in the news because the TV comics are going to play this one to the hilt. Frank Bruni at the New York Times suggests that Trump is self-destructing before our eyes, and he cites some polling information that as of today, 52.5% of Americans disapprove of his job performance, 43% approve. Other numbers show that in the battleground states that enabled his electoral college win 3.5 years ago, he is behind Biden by 6.5 points in Pennsylvania, 5.5 in Michigan, 2.7 in Wisconsin, and 3.2 in Florida. And also, according to Gallup, the satisfaction rate with Trump, with the way things are going in the country, dropped to 30% in mid-April from 42% in mid-March. So this is going to be, played pretty hard, and we will certainly follow it. And, of course, I have equal amusement at this idiotic behavior and the risk that some Trumper somewhere is going to say, fake news in the media. Trump told us this. It's a miracle cure. I've been watching this guy Grennan on TV. I'm going to give it a try. In other news that Linda has summarized for us, Homeland Security is now warning us that domestic terrorists and violent extremists are mobilizing in response to the coronavirus pandemic. And I believe that today is some D-Day for the Boogaloo Boys, but I don't follow them enough to know, and we'll have to wait and see if there are any reports of violent incidents linked to them. But in a memo dated April 23rd and obtained by Politico, they cite recent arrests of individuals who've threatened government facilities and elected officials over the health restrictions. And of course, this dry report, and I just have a summary of it here, but I doubt that it includes anything about how these liberate protesters, the anti-quarantine mini-mobs that I've talked about, are orchestrated by well-funded right-wing groups linked to the Tea Party, the Koch brothers, and really extreme gun rights groups. And, of course, there is very little mention of the way corporate media amplifies these antics and creates the false perception of a national movement. And I watched with a little concern last night on the PBS NewsHour as they recapped the various protests that have occurred, and then, to their credit, in a kind of milquetoast way, they did expose that, these are linked to right-wing groups, but none of the rich detail that you've heard here on the PBC podcast. Linda also has dug up from Scientific American a report issued last July, the National Threat and Hazard Identification and Risk Assessment from FEMA, warned that a pandemic caused by a novel strain of influenza would cripple the country's response capabilities, driving millions of people into overwhelmed hospitals. The report forecast with stunning accuracy the social, economic, and personal devastation that a pandemic could cause. This report, which hasn't previously been described, was drafted in collaboration with the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. Did anyone read it? Well, we know Trump doesn't read. We hope that people he pays to work for him actually do. And the current FEMA administrator, Peter Gaynor, has tried to deflect responsibility for the pandemic's damage by saying, HHS, Health and Human Services, is really responsible for all that. And Linda also cites, going back to January 2000, a national intelligence estimate, warning of new, more lethal variants of influenza, and warning that the infectious disease threat will complicate U.S. and global security over the next 20 years. I know, besides Kyle, I've got some listeners in Michigan, and the governor's office of Gretchen Whitmer has revised its orders. It requires, rather than encourages, residents to wear face coverings in enclosed public spaces, says employers must provide coverings to their employees. It does allow landscapers, lawn service companies, and bike repair shops to resume operations. I'm not sure how they cherry-pick those. Those selling non-essential supplies can reopen for curbside pickup and delivery, but the order does not explicitly address the auto industry and what their rules of engagement are for returning to work. As you know, from his podium in the White House, where the president presides for up to 2 hours a day and the media continues to excessively cover his remarks and ranting, he was recently promoting hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine, ordered up millions of pills to stockpile. And now, in a communication issued on Friday, the FDA says, quote, "We are aware of reports of serious heart rhythm problems in patients with COVID-19 treated with hydroxychloroquine or chloroquine, often in combination with azithromycin and other drugs that can disrupt heart rhythm." The statement also said people were getting outpatient prescriptions for the drugs in the hopes of preventing the infection or treating it themselves. And in the voice of the New York Times, there is no proof that hydroxychloroquine and chloroquine can help coronavirus patients. They are approved to treat malaria and the autoimmune diseases lupus and rheumatoid arthritis, but reports from France and China suggesting a benefit sparked interest in the drugs, even though the reports lacked the scientific controls needed to determine if they actually worked on this specific virus strain. In a separate report, remdesivir, the drug promoted by Gilead, the profiteering biotech company based here in the Bay Area that charges $60,000 for a course of treatment for hepatitis C. Well, the latest trial conducted in Asia, it was in China, of this drug remdesivir, shows that it really has no appreciable effect. Here are the details. In the trial, 158 patients were randomly assigned to be given the drug, while 79 others had standard care with a placebo instead. There was no difference between the groups with respect to recovery time. Just under 14% of those on remdesivir died, compared with 13% of those not taking the treatment. Now, earlier this week, I reported, like many other media outlets, that a study of the antibodies taken from people in Santa Clara County, which we now know was, at least to our knowledge to date, the first site of 2 fatalities now attributed to COVID-19. And these studies came from Stanford University and the University of Southern California, and those confer credibility, right? But controversy has erupted, and it turns out that the Stanford study sample was based on detecting only 50 positives out of a mere 3,300 people sampled. And since the test had a false positive rate in one assessment of 2 out of 371, critics argued that all the COVID-19 cases detected by the tests in Santa Clara could conceivably have been false positives. So here's Andrew Gelman, Director of Applied Stats at Columbia. I think the authors of the above-linked paper owe us all an apology. We wasted time and effort discussing this paper whose main selling point was some numbers that were essentially the product of a statistical error. And an author and biotech investor is quoted here, Peter Kolchinsky. He tweeted that the flaws with this study could trick you into thinking that getting shot in the head has a low chance. Ouch. Now, another interesting approach to data on the pandemic, based on the current death count in the United States, shows the per capita rate of deaths. And I think this helps illustrate in a different way because of all the problems we're having coming up with a definition of what is a case. Is it a positive test with no symptoms? Is it only based on hospitalizations? Well, you get the idea. So, this is just much drier. And, for example, in New York, the highest rate, 79 deaths per 100,000. New Jersey, 57 deaths per 100K. Washington State, the original outbreak zone, we thought, 9 deaths per 100,000. California, where we sheltered in place sooner than most other places, 4 deaths per 100,000. Michigan has more deaths than California and a rate of 28 per 100,000. Illinois, 12 per 100,000. Louisiana, the Mardi Gras state, 32 per 100,000. And Georgia, where Governor Brian Kemp has reopened the tattoo, massage parlors, beauty parlors, bowling alleys, 8 deaths per 100,000. That's double the rate in California, and our parlors are not reopened. Linda also shared some data from the Star-Telegram in Fort Worth, Texas. The number of inmates who tested positive for the COVID-19 at Fort Worth Federal Medical Center increased by nearly 275% since Tuesday. And the actual numbers is the current positive count is 131, and it was 56 reported on Wednesday. And one person there has died. Over at Shadowproof, Brian Sonnenstein runs the project called Beyond Prisons. And in an interview with Johanna Fernandez, who is a legal and personal advocate for a man I consider to be a political prisoner, Mumia Abu-Jamal. And you may know that he was treated for hepatitis C after having to sue the state of Pennsylvania to provide the health care. They said he wasn't worth it because it was too expensive. That's Gilead's profiteering at work. But last week I mentioned on the podcast that there was an organized effort to petition the governor of Pennsylvania and authorities there to release Mumia because in his botched treatment for hepatitis C, his liver was compromised, and that puts him at greater risk of the coronavirus. So on that day, one of the activists called the prison where Mumia is being held and was told by a staff person, "Oh, we're sorry to tell you, but Mumia has been transferred to the hospital diagnosed with the coronavirus." Another activist called back and got the same statement. It was a hoax. They made it up in an effort to distract or marginalize the people who spoke up in support of Mumia. That is truly unconscionable. And that leads me to today's grant from the Peter B. Collins Podcast Community Fund. We are sending $100 to Boston Woodard. And I've actually known Boston for quite a while. He spent 38 years in prison. Part of that time just across the highway here at San Quentin State Prison. He also worked on the San Quentin News for many years. He published his own book. He formed a writers group. And when he was transferred up the road to the Vacaville prison, he invited me up to speak to the writers group one time, and I really enjoyed it. And so Boston is a listener to this podcast since he was released about a year ago. He has completed his parole, but he was laid off as a chef at a restaurant near San Jose. And he currently has an income of $900 a month from Social Security, and his rent is $900 a month. He says, "I've been borrowing a few bucks here and there, kind of embarrassing, but that's what it is." He says, "I'm not a criminal anymore, so armed robbery," I think that's what he went up the river for, "is out of the question." So I am very pleased to take money that was donated by listeners to this podcast, including Paul Elsesser, who pumped up his contribution this month to the podcast to help out with the community fund. And Paul's been very generous to support this podcast all along. And so today we are mailing out $100 to Boston Woodard to help him through this difficult time. And I don't want you to hold back. If you could use $100 to cover a phone bill, to help close the gap to pay your rent, to buy some groceries, maybe to buy some prescriptions that you need, please send an email to peter@peterbcollins.com. We want to help, and we want you to just make the ask so that we can do that. And in turn, I invite listeners who have a little extra cash to donate what you can to the community fund. All you have to do is hit my PayPal. You can do that at peterbcollins.com/signup. You can also mail a check to my P.O. Box, number 150-660, San Rafael, California, 94915. So today I spent an hour with a man I truly respect and enjoy, Pepe Escobar, the globe-trotting journalist. We caught up with him in Bangkok today. And his view from offshore and without the kind of American anti-communist hysterical filter is something that you need to hear. We talk about what he describes as America's hybrid war against China. And he says that's how the leadership in Beijing views it. And the most of that doesn't get reported in the American media because, well, it's originally presented in Chinese. And our conversation covers a range of topics, including speculation. He says, look, nobody knows where the virus came from, but it's possible it was accidentally or intentionally leaked out of Fort Detrick here in the United States or the Wuhan Virology Laboratory. He said, but it's clear that U.S. intelligence knew about it far before it surfaced. And he offers a number of other interesting comments about his long-running analysis about the New Silk Road, the alliance between Russia and China, the decline of U.S. influence despite Trump's belligerence. And toward the end of the interview, he breaks some news coming from Brazil because just before I connected with Pepe, he was doing a podcast interview with some of his colleagues in Brazil. And you will hear the news that the government of Jair Bolsonaro is on shaky ground with the resignation of the big prosecutor who helped lead to the impeachment of Dilma Rousseff and the imprisonment of former President Lula da Silva. It is quite a conversation. Here's an excerpt from my chat with Pepe Escobar.
Like I said before, the Chinese are not going to deviate from the big picture. They have number one priority, put their economic house in order, which they think they're going to do starting now, 2020, and by the end of 2021, things will be more or less back to normal. Number two, continue the expansion of the New Silk Roads, side by side with the internationalization of the yuan, etc. And number three, Made in China 2025, it's only 4.5 years from now. It's literally tomorrow. And they are not going to deviate from this process of basically digitalizing most of their economy and getting to the next level in information technology. So, the major planks of the master plan are still there. Let's say they were derailed for a while because of coronavirus. But if the other side was thinking in terms of this is going to completely collapse the Chinese economy, intentionally or unintentionally, we can already say for sure the plan failed.
I highly recommend my interview with Pepe. It's an hour long and it'll feel like about 20 minutes. He is just such an amazing and well-informed man with sources all over the world. And it's available for subscribers today at peterbcollins.com, iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher. And if you're not a subscriber and you want to hear it, you can get a 24-hour pass for just $1. All the details at peterbcollins.com/signup. Well, this is going to be a very interesting test. Will we find out who actually ordered Captain Brett Crozier to be relieved of command of the USS Teddy Roosevelt, the aircraft carrier? Because Navy brass is recommending the reinstatement of the captain on the very same ship. But Trump's toady and a former defense industry executive, Mark Esper, has asked for more time to consider whether he'll sign off on that. And I guess he's got to check with the boss. And it's entirely possible that the guy, the Navy leader, his name is Tom Modly or Modley, the guy who flew all the way out to the ship at a taxpayer cost of $40,000, gave a rambling talk where he dissed Captain Crozier and embarrassed himself before the crew. We're going to find out if he did that on his own or if Trump had picked up the phone and said, "Tell Crozier, you're fired." Governor Cuomo of New York stepped up his pushback on Mitch McConnell's call for the states to consider bankruptcy rather than receive federal aid. Cuomo said that states can't legally declare bankruptcy, and he dared McConnell to pass legislation which would enable them to do so. Your suggestion, Senator McConnell? Pass the law. I dare you. You want to send a signal to the markets that this nation is in real trouble? You want to send an international message that the economy is in turmoil? Do that. And another quote from the governor, he said, if you believe what you said and you have the courage of conviction because you're a man of your world, pass that bill. If you weren't just playing politics. We'll see how long it takes him to do it. Now today, Trump, surrounded only by Republicans and absent Mitch McConnell, signed the latest relief bill into law. $484 billion. It started out as only $250, mostly to aid small businesses who were widely bypassed in the first round under the CARES Act. And it's very clear that while the Republicans frame the Democratic negotiations as obstruction and holding up badly needed aid for Americans, they actually improved it by getting money for hospitals, also $60 billion to be funneled through smaller community lenders to reach businesses that can't access the bigger banks. $60 billion, not nearly enough to replenish the Small Business Administration disaster relief accounts. $25 billion for COVID-19 testing. That's not nearly enough either, but none of that was in the original bill. Also in the package is a $10 billion authorization to loan money from the Treasury to the U.S. Postal Service. But Trump is threatening to illegally withhold that money. The post office is a joke, he said. The PO should raise the price of package delivery by 4 times. And this is his long-running fight with Jeff Bezos, who owns the Washington Post, and separately has the control. He doesn't own a majority of the shares, but he has control of Amazon. And Trump threatened, if they don't raise the price, the post office, on package delivery, I'm not signing anything. Well, he did sign it. So it's another bluff, but he is, willing to use unorthodox and illegal tactics to get his way. And there's no question. I used to feel that the post office had to deliver my mail 6 days a week, but I don't get very much interesting mail anymore, and I could lose Saturday delivery. I could accept 3 days a week. So I'm not opposed to trimming the Postal Service, but it's fundamentally in the red because of bad actions by Congress that are designed to strangle it. And as you know, they have to fully fund retirement benefits forward for the next 75 years. There is no other balance sheet that requires that in corporate or government in this country. And so this is all a charade. And what are they going to do? How are they going to deliver rural mail? FedEx will drop your magazines and your bills for $14 a package? I mean, some compromise has to be reached here, and fundamentally, they have to lift those onerous accounting requirements. 2 good pieces at the Intercept today. We learned that the loans to small businesses coming from the SBA are supposed to be entirely forgiven if an owner spends most of the money on payroll and doesn't lay anyone off. But those who actually get through the maze, run the gauntlet, and are approved for a loan, when they get the loan papers, there is no written guarantee that there will be relief, forgiveness of the loans. It kind of suggests it, but the document says, well, let me quote, lender makes no representation or promise to borrower with respect to governmental forgiveness of any amount of the loan or related interest. Borrower understands that the program currently contains conditions under which forgiveness may apply and agrees to understand and comply with such conditions as they exist and may change over time. That is such bullshit. I know we've got some lawyers listening to this, and if you wrote an agreement like that, you would lose your bar license. But that's the game as it's being played right now. And the estimable Lee Fung, also at the Intercept, he tracked down some of the early recipients of the Payroll Protection Program loans. And for example, the largest known recipient of the rescue money has been a set of luxury hotels run by Monty Bennett and his son Archie. They've obtained over $59 million in PPP funds for a group that they own, which includes the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands. Yes, a bailout for the Ritz. The father and son, you'll be surprised to learn, are also mega donors who've given nearly $500,000 to Trump since 2016. They also employ Jeffrey Miller, a lobbyist and fundraiser, who's raised $1.5 million for Trump's 2020 re-election effort. Then there's Continental Materials Corporation, a construction equipment product company. They got $5.5 million in loans. And they're owned by the family of Ronald Gidwitz, who's donated $50,000 to Trump and $109,000 to the Republican National Committee in recent years. And I don't need to detail this crony corruption any further for you because you get the point. And in a separate report, this is at the New York Times, the giveaways to wealthy Americans contained in the fine print of the 900-page original version of the CARES Act gave tax breaks that can only benefit the uber wealthy. Now, we've talked before about the depreciation allowance, but it's even more onerous than I thought because it allows you to basically bypass the rules of the game today and use depreciation to offset your investment gains, your capital gains. And it also allows, essentially, you can write off losses from previous years. It's really slippery stuff, and it was inserted by corporate lobbyists. Here's another provision. Companies can deduct losses in 1 year against profits they have earned years later. And all of this was described as benefiting or, trying to provide relief because of the pandemic. It has absolutely nothing to do with that. And I saw Republicans hammering Nancy Pelosi for asking for $25 million for the Kennedy Center in Washington and all the tusking about that. Selective vision is a beautiful thing. The Guardian today is reporting that Donald Trump's 30% share in a $1 billion building on the Avenue of the Americas in Manhattan was refinanced in 2012, and the loan came from the state-owned Bank of China. His share of that amounts to $60 million. And as he plays all kinds of games with China, the tariffs, blaming them and praising them in turn for the coronavirus handling, he knows he owes. Stephen Miller, of course, you know him, the immigrant hater in the White House, one of the longest-serving Trump officials. He told a bunch of insiders, they're described as Trump surrogates for the campaign, in a conference call the other night, that the move this week to limit green cards that's been described as temporary for 60 days, nope. They expect to leave it in place for the foreseeable future. And despite all this, Trump is being hammered from the far, far right because they believe that allowing guest workers like the people who pick our crops is too easy on the immigration front. Here's Dan Stein, president of the Federation for American Immigration Reform, blasting the order for excluding temporary work visas. And some of those are medical professionals who we badly need at this time. Ryan Grimm at The Intercept, following up on some of his great reporting on the accusations by former Senate staffer Tara Reade against her former boss, Joe Biden, of sexual assault. Well, I really give Ryan Grimm credit here, because Tara Reade had said vaguely, well, I think my mom called into Larry King Live at about the time that I was trying to get my accusations, which at that point were not detailed about sexual assault, but harassment. She was trying to get them taken seriously and investigated. Well, it turns out that Katie Halper talked about this with Tara Reade in a podcast, and a listener found the call. Now, this takes a lot of research, and Larry King is quite a character. I know him a little bit, interviewed him several times. He worked out of a studio in Crystal City, across the river from Washington, where I would do remote broadcasts, and I would be ending as he was showing up for work. And he is such a nice guy, all right? Not the hardest-hitting interviewer, but a really nice man. And this transcript here is quite in his style. Let me imitate. San Luis Obispo, California. Hello. And, of course, Larry never gave the names of his callers. He just gave the city that they called from, and then the unnamed voice would pipe up. Caller. Yes, hello. I'm wondering what a staffer would do besides go to the press in Washington. My daughter has just left there after working for a prominent senator and could not get through with her problems at all. And the only thing she could have done was go to the press, and she chose not to do that out of respect for him. So the show was nominally about whistleblowers in Washington. And Tara Reid's mom made that phone call, and that is more evidence that buttresses her claim. Will the Democrats and the media continue to dismiss it at their deep risk? Over at the Democratic National Committee, a shuffle, installing a new Joe Biden appointee to run the high-dollar fundraising. You know, I talked about this in 2016, how the Hillary Clinton Victory Fund allowed George Clooney to buy dinner tickets for $360,000. The money was supposed to be shared. A lot of it never made it to the congressional and Senate campaigns it was also supposed to be funding. And we know that some of the money that was raised during the primary was used to fund online advertising for Hillary Clinton at the expense of Bernie Sanders. Two more items on Biden. He is warning that Donald Trump may try to delay the November election. Now, he doesn't really offer any evidence. It's pretty speculative, but he says, mark my words, I think he's going to try to kick back the election somehow, come up with some rationale why it can't be held. And while Trump really hasn't even hinted at this, the closest he's come is to object to the post office funding that we cited earlier. And Biden links that to the effort to allow people to vote by mail in the presidential race because of COVID. And Biden's quoted, imagine threatening not to fund the post office. Now, what in God's name is that about? Other than trying to let the word out that he's going to do all he can to make it very hard for people to vote. That's the only way he thinks he can possibly win. And then, gratuitously, Uncle Joe added, I promise you the Russians did interfere in 2016, and I guarantee you they are doing it again with two other major actors whom he didn't name. And as you know, I find that to be an unproven claim at best. Polling shows that Latino voters who strongly supported Bernie Sanders in the primary are withholding a decision so far on supporting Joe Biden. And the polling shows that there's been a drop. In late February, 73% of Latino voters said they were almost certain to vote in November. And 2 months later, after Bernie dropped out, that number has dropped to 60%. And the tea leaves that are interpreted in the article suggest that it relates to the large number of deportations that occurred in the Obama-Biden administration. Earlier, I mentioned that Pepe Escobar broke some news about what's going on in Brazil. And notably, Sergio Moro, the former federal judge who ran the anti-corruption crackdown, the car wash investigation, which itself has been discovered as corrupt through the great journalistic work of Glenn Greenwald. Well, Pepe also reports that the generals are moving in and that currently the government's actually being run by a military official. I hope you'll listen to the Pepe interview and get more information. And I want to note that what appears to be a gift to the newspaper industry, which is on its knees because of the long-running problems now compounded by a deep drop in advertising revenue because of the pandemic. Facebook in the San Francisco Chronicle, and in my local Marin Independent Journal paid for 3 full-page ads in the front section of each newspaper. And the ads are mostly white space with just a kind of picture of a computer screen and expressions of gratitude, for example, to autoimmune warriors. And on this next ad, thank you for being brave to all of the frontline medical workers in the country. And I applaud. The newspapers are desperate. We've covered how the Cleveland Plain Dealer is busting unions as it moves its operations almost entirely online. Layoffs at the Los Angeles Times, despite the recent ownership takeover by a billionaire from the healthcare industry. So while I often criticize Facebook today, I will just say thank you. And finally, we close with a Facebook post. We don't know who wrote it, but it was posted by one of my Facebook friends. And it is aimed at the mini-mobs who have been out there ginning up these protests orchestrated by well-funded right-wing interest groups and amplified by the media. And I'll just read it for your consideration. It opens, I'm confused. You say it's your right to protest, but you got angry when Kaepernick took a knee. You say your body is your own, but you get very angry at a woman who demands the same. You are against abortion, saying every life is precious, yet you are willing to sacrifice your parents and grandparents for the economy. You claim coronavirus is fake, yet you wear a mask, gown, and gloves. You say health care is a privilege, but want your COVID-19 hospitalization covered. You say socialism is bad, yet your hand is out for a stimulus check, unemployment benefits, and you wait in line at a food bank. What you say confuses me. Forgive me if I no longer care what you say. Thanks for listening to my daily news and comment podcast. You're free to share it absolutely everywhere. You'll find it on YouTube, and I'm still Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling.